Money doesn't exist. Think about it. A $100 bill is a piece of cotton with ink on it. A Bitcoin is a number in a computer. A gold bar is a shiny rock. None of them feed you, shelter you, or keep you warm. Yet people have killed for money, died for money, enslaved millions for money, and built every institution on Earth around it. Money works for one reason only, because we all agreed to pretend. This is the history of that pretend, and why it's the most powerful illusion humanity has ever created. Welcome to Object Origins. I'm your host, and on this channel, we dig into the history of everyday things, where they came from, why they survived, and what they say about us. And nothing says more about us than money. Quick note before we dive in, nothing in this video is financial advice. We're doing history here, not investment tips. What I am going to give you is something more valuable than that, a clear-eyed look at what money actually is, where it came from, and why it keeps working. In this video, you're going to see the full arc, from prehistoric bartering to commodity money like cattle, shells, and salt, then to the world's first metal coins in ancient Lydia, then to paper money in China in the catastrophic inflation that followed, then to the banking empires built by the Medici and the Knights Templar, all the way through the gold standard, Bretton Woods, Nixon's 1971 bombshell, fiat currency, and finally Bitcoin in 2009. Stay for point 5, because that's where the whole illusion either clicks into place or falls apart completely. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's the thing most people get wrong. Money didn't replace chaos. It replaced a system that already existed, and that system was barter. You have grain, I have fish. We trade. Clean, simple, logical, right? Except it's a nightmare in practice. What economists call the double coincidence of wants. You need to find someone who has exactly what you need and wants exactly what you have at exactly the same time. If you're a farmer with excess wheat and you need shoes, you have to find a cobbler who happens to be hungry. That doesn't scale. That breaks down the moment society gets even slightly complex. So early communities started experimenting. They needed something everyone would accept, not because it was useful in itself, but because everyone agreed it had value. And this is where the history of money actually begins. Not with coins or banks or paper. It begins with a collective agreement. That's the seed of the whole thing. The first real money wasn't stamped metal. It was alive, it smelled, and sometimes it died on you. We're talking about cattle. Across ancient cultures, Africa, the Middle East, early Europe, livestock was wealth. The Latin word for money, pecunia, comes directly from pecus, which means cattle. That's how baked in this was. But cattle were bulky, hard to divide, hard to transport. So communities started using things that were more portable. Cowrie shells in China and South Asia, used continuously for thousands of years. Cacao beans in Mesoamerica. And salt, so valuable across the ancient world that Roman soldiers were literally paid in it. That's where the word salary comes from. Your paycheck, etymologically speaking, is a bag of salt. Now here's what's fascinating. None of these things had intrinsic power. A cowrie shell doesn't do anything. Salt has utility, sure, but not at the quantities being exchanged. These things worked because communities agreed they worked. You're already seeing the pattern. The evolution of currency isn't a story of finding better materials, it's a story of finding better agreements. Around 600 BC, something happened in a small kingdom in western Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, that would change commerce forever. The Lydians, ruled at the time under King Alyattes, started stamping small lumps of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, with official symbols. These weren't just metal, they were government-certified metal. Standardized weight, standardized purity, standardized trust. This was the invention of the coin as we understand it. And it spread fast. Greece picked it up, Persia picked it up, Rome built an empire on it. Because here's what coins solved that commodity money couldn't: portability, divisibility, and, crucially, verifiability. You didn't have to trust the other person. You trusted the stamp. You trusted the authority behind the stamp. Which brings up a question that should make you a little uneasy. What happens when you stop trusting the authority? Rome found out the hard way. As the empire strained under military costs and political instability, emperors began debasing their coins, quietly shaving off silver content, mixing in cheaper metals. The coins looked the same. They were worth less. And when enough people figured that out, Roman commerce started to collapse. The illusion cracked. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to it. Jump forward about 1,400 years and thousands of miles east. Tang Dynasty China, around 800 AD, is dealing with a problem that sounds almost modern. Metal coins are heavy, inconvenient, and there aren't always enough of them. Merchants traveling long distances don't want to haul chests of bronze, so they start depositing coins with trusted agents and carrying receipts instead. Paper receipts, promises of payment. The Song dynasty formalized this into actual government-issued paper currency, jiaozi, around the early 10th century. This was a genuinely radical idea. Money with no intrinsic material value at all, just a piece of paper backed by a promise. It worked beautifully, until it didn't. Because the temptation with paper money is always the same. When you need more money, you can just print more. And that's exactly what successive dynasties did. More paper chasing the same amount of goods. Prices climbed. Confidence collapsed. By the time the Yuan dynasty overextended paper issuance in the 13th and 14th centuries, they were dealing with inflation so severe that paper money was functionally worthless in parts of the empire. Marco Polo witnessed it and was astonished, not by the failure, but by the fact that it had worked at all. China had discovered something crucial. Paper money is only as good as the restraint of the people printing it. That lesson would be learned and forgotten many times over. We're halfway through this story, and the wildest part is still ahead. Banking empires, a 1971 presidential bombshell, and a question that might genuinely change how you look at your bank account. Stick with me. Here's where it gets really interesting. By the medieval period, Europe is doing more long-distance trade than ever, and physically moving gold across dangerous roads is a bad idea. So two different groups, almost independently, figure out a solution that is essentially modern banking. The Knights Templar, yes, those Templars, the crusading military order, developed a system where a pilgrim or merchant could deposit money at a Templar house in France, receive a coded letter, travel to the Holy Land, and withdraw funds at a Templar house there. No gold moved, just information, just trust in the institution. This is proto-banking, and it worked across thousands of miles of medieval Europe. Meanwhile, in Florence, the Medici family built something even more sophisticated. Starting in the 14th century, they created a network of banking branches across Europe, holding deposits, issuing letters of credit, financing kings and popes. They essentially invented double-entry bookkeeping, which sounds boring until you realize it's the accounting system that still runs the global economy today. The Medici didn't just do banking. They invented the infrastructure of financial trust. Money stopped being a thing you carried and started being a relationship you maintained with an institution. And that shift, from physical money to institutional trust, is the hinge point of the entire history of money. Everything after this is just more layers on that same idea. Trust the system, and the system works. Fast forward to the 19th century. The industrial world is booming. Global trade is expanding, and governments need a way to make their currencies credible across borders. The solution? Tie your currency to gold. The gold standard history is essentially a story of governments saying, this paper note is real because, if you wanted to, you could trade it for a fixed amount of gold. It anchored money to something physical, something scarce, something you could theoretically hold. It mostly worked, until World War I, and then World War II required governments to spend far more than their gold reserves could justify. After World War II, the major Allied powers gathered at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in 1944 and agreed on a new system. The US dollar would be pegged to gold at $35 per ounce, and every other major currency would be pegged to the dollar. One anchor, one chain, everyone connected. But by the late 1960s, the US was spending heavily on the Vietnam War, on domestic programs, and printing dollars faster than its gold supply could support. Foreign governments started to notice. France, notably, began demanding actual gold for their dollars. The system was straining. Then, on August 15, 1971, President Nixon went on television and said, "We're suspending the dollar's convertibility to gold." Just like that. No referendum, no international consensus. A unilateral decision that ended the Bretton Woods system overnight. Economists call it the Nixon Shock, and it's one of the most consequential moments in modern fiat money explained history. Because from that moment on, the US dollar, and by extension, most of the world's currencies, were backed by nothing physical at all. Just faith. Just the agreement. Just the pretend. Here's the thread running through all of this: greed. Not as a moral failing, just as a constant, predictable human force. King Midas asked for everything he touched to turn to gold, and in the myth, it killed him. His food, his drink, eventually, his daughter. It's one of the oldest warnings in Western culture about confusing the symbol of wealth with actual sustenance. But we don't learn. The California gold rush of 1849 sent hundreds of thousands of people chasing a metal that, in practice, mostly made money for the people selling them shovels and jeans. Weimar Germany in the early 1920s printed money so aggressively that workers were paid twice a day so they could spend it before it lost value by afternoon. People famously burned banknotes for heat because the wood cost more. Zimbabwe in the 2000s printed a $100 trillion note that couldn't buy a bus ticket. Every single time, the pattern is the same. Someone with the power to create money creates too much of it, confidence collapses, and the illusion falls apart. And then, usually, a new illusion is constructed and the whole thing starts again. Wall Street's 2008 crisis followed the same logic. Financial instruments built on layers of trust, all of it collapsing when enough people stopped believing the underlying value was real. And crypto bubbles of the 2000s and 10s and 2000s and 20s? Same pattern. New asset, speculative frenzy, collapse, repeat. The technology changes, the human behavior doesn't. In 2009, in the direct aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, while governments were bailing out banks with money they printed, an anonymous person or group called Satoshi Nakamoto published a white paper and launched Bitcoin. The Bitcoin history begins as a deliberate challenge to exactly the system we've been describing. Bitcoin is fiat money explained from the other direction. Instead of a government declaring value by decree, the value comes from a decentralized network, a fixed supply cap of 21 million coins, and, critically, collective belief in the protocol. No central bank, no Nixon Shock possible. No one can print more. And yet, Bitcoin is worth what it's worth because people agree it's worth that. The mechanism is different, the mathematics are different, but the fundamental truth is identical. It's still an agreement. It's still collective belief. Whether you think that makes Bitcoin the future of money or the newest iteration of humanity's oldest illusion, well, that might depend on which side of the agreement you're standing on. Quick note, this isn't investment commentary. Bitcoin's value fluctuates significantly, and nothing here should be taken as financial guidance. What I will say historically is this: every major monetary transition in human history was once considered radical. Coins replacing cattle was radical. Paper replacing coins was radical. Numbers on screens replacing paper is, at minimum, historically consistent. So here's where we've landed. The history of money is not a story of humans gradually discovering what money really is. It's a story of humans continuously negotiating what they're willing to agree to. Barter broke down, so we agreed on cattle and shells and salt. Those were inconvenient, so we agreed on coins. Coins were heavy and scarce, so we agreed on paper backed by gold. Gold was constraining, so we agreed on paper backed by nothing but the word of governments. Governments became untrustworthy to some, so some of us agreed on math backed by code. Every step, from cowrie shells to Bitcoin, the underlying mechanism is the same. Why money works has never been about the material. It's always been about the belief.
The moment that belief cracks, Weimar, Zimbabwe, Rome's debased coins, the whole structure shudders. And the moment a new belief solidifies, the economy starts moving again. And here's the thing that I find genuinely astonishing about all of this. Every morning, 8 billion people wake up and silently agree that pieces of cotton with ink on them, or numbers on a phone screen, have real value. No vote, no meeting, no reminder. Just a shared hallucination so stable and so universal that it builds hospitals, funds wars, moves cargo ships, and determines whether you eat well or not at all. This is the most powerful illusion humanity has ever created. And the remarkable thing, the thing that makes it actually beautiful in a strange way, is that it works. If this kind of deep dive into where things actually come from is what you're here for, then you're going to want to stick around for the next one. We're covering tobacco, a plant that shaped empires, funded revolutions, and became humanity's most persistent habit. It's called Tobacco, the history of humanity's most persistent habit, and it's already up on the channel. Go watch it.
And if you want more object origins in your life, subscribe, because we do this every week. See you in the next one.